Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hi, Bridget. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you very much for inviting me on your show. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for accepting our invite. And I'm super excited, Bridget, for this conversation today, because today we're going to talk about a very specific topic. And I love it when it's very specific. The more specific, the better for our podcast. And among other things, you are an expert at breathing, and you are also very much experienced from a public speaking perspective. And so we are going to connect the dots today. We're going to talk about breathing and public speaking.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you, my first question is around what's wrong with it? If you think about the way most people breathe. So first of all, how is it? How do most people breathe? And what do you think? What's wrong with it?
Wow, so we're getting straight stuck in. Okay, so perhaps we just have a little quick revision of how we would breathe if everything was going perfectly. And if you think about a baby, when you're holding a newborn baby, or even like a 6-month-old, you can see the belly going up and down, can't you? You know, it rises up and down. So as the baby breathes in always through the nose, then the belly pushes up. And because what's happening is the diaphragm, which is, you know, if I just stand up a bit, which is there, it pushes down, and then that forces the organs out. So not only is it massaging the organs, which is great for your digestion and everything, the diaphragm's going down. It's like a piston. It's a one-way muscle. So it pushes down and then it just comes back on its own. So that's how we're all born. We're all born breathing absolutely perfectly. And it's a very efficient way of breathing because we're not fighting gravity. We're just making more space for the lungs. And as there's more space, the lungs inflate. And then there's a difference between the outside pressure and the inside pressure. So the air goes in our body. Because don't forget, lungs don't have muscles, do they? They're just lots of little sacs. So quick revision of how we should be breathing and how we all start breathing. But what happens is life comes along, I think, and we get into, they call it dysfunctional breathing patterns. It just means incorrect breathing patterns. And so there's about 4 or 5 of them. But the most typical one is people who become chest breathers. So rather than using their diaphragm, which would go down and allow the lungs to inflate, they use like emergency breathing muscles. So these muscles to pull up the rib cage, shoulder muscles and neck muscles. And these would be muscles that we use when we, you know, the fight or flight, when we suddenly need to go like through our mouth, and we use this area. And perhaps if we're doing sport and we can no longer breathe through our nose, so then we would switch to this way of breathing. So what happens is people get stuck in these dysfunctional patterns. So one of them is the chest breather, or we call that the top breather. So if you imagine, you know, the lungs, it's like that, the kind of shape like that. So imagine you chop the bottom off and then you're only breathing in the top section. So you're not very efficient breather. And the other thing that happens is that these muscles get overused and they're not designed for breathing. They're designed for, you know, doing that and all sorts of things with your head and neck. So then you start to get problems with a lot of tension and trigger points here.
Right, right. And so if we want to simplify, and I know that from a scientific perspective, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but can we say that we've got this difference between belly breathing and chest breathing? Can we say, yeah. Okay.
And we need both, because belly breathing should be most of the time, you know, sitting at our desk, you know, most of our daily life should be belly breathing. Definitely we should be belly breathing at night, always through the nose. And then the other kind of breathing, which is the chest breathing, is more like emergency, like we've got to run away, or exertion, you know, sport. So there's nothing wrong with this. Like if you're cycling up a hill, hell's bells, you've got to use that, haven't you? So yes, those are the 2 different ones. But what happens is people get into bad breathing happens. So one is this upper chest breather. Another one, they all have names. So that one's like hyperinflated or top breather. Another one, which I discovered is my one, is imagine if I was standing opposite you and I went and I punched you in the gut. What would you do? You'd tense your muscles. You would, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd be ready for if you saw my punch coming, you'd be like, what? Tense the muscles. So They call this kind of breathing pattern stand up to life, because basically I'm going to stand up and do it. And you're like, whoa, you're ready to fight, you know. So this is very tight. So what would happen if your stomach muscles were very tight, Andrea? Your diaphragm wouldn't be able to go down, would it? Because you'd locked that part. So for those people, when they get into a stress mode, then they tense here, like they clench all their abdominal belt. And then that makes them into a chest breather, but it's a different reason from the other kinds of chest breathers. Yeah. So they get stuck in this very tight stomach, and it prevents the diaphragm from working properly. Yeah. Where the other people get stuck with a very inflated chest and all this upper chest breathing, and they get blocked in.
And Bridget, why does that happen? If you think about, so most of our listeners are people who are in one way or another interested in speaking and presenting and communication in general. So why is it that when it comes to giving presentations, whether that's in a meeting, a business presentation, or more of a conference talk, it doesn't really matter, but a lot of people don't breathe correctly, or they tend to do that kind of breathing that you've just described from this part of the body? What's going on there?
So I think what happens is that we have like a pattern. So you know how some people say, oh my God, when I get nervous, you know, I sweat on my upper lip, or people say, oh, I sweat on my brow and I have to get my hanky, or other people say, I never wear dark shirts because, you know, I'll get this huge spread of perspiration. And for other people, it will be a fidgeting thing or a leg balancing. So I think we all have these kind of almost tics, you know, that we do when we get nervous, or like licking our lips or chewing our lips or nibbling our nails. And I think the same happens with breathing. Everybody will have their own dysfunctional breathing pattern. I mean, I only described the two most common. So what happens when they get in a moment of stress is their body goes into that stress mode. So they go into up chest breathing. Or for someone like me, I go into this very clenched stomach, like, yeah, I'm ready to fight. But actually, it's not a very good way of fighting because I don't get enough air. So I think if you can start, I mean, the biggest thing is building awareness around how you breathe. And, you know, there's lots of apps, there's lots of articles, there's lots of stuff, or you can go to yoga and do pranayama. But just taking time to understand how your body breathes and how you can learn how to get into this nice calm breathing, the belly breathing, but also how you can recognize that you have this other, you know, like stress pattern. Yeah. So for me, I'll tell you what happened for me is I think, you know, I lived in China for 12 years, so pretty full on. I lived in Beijing, had my own company, worked very hard, obviously, like everyone who's an entrepreneur. I actually used to translate and edit, so I was always typing, and you know how you get stressed, your shoulders go up and up and up. And I always had a lot of neck problems. So I'd go to the chiro and the physio, and they'd like crack my neck and all this, but it would just keep repeating. I'd get stuck in a loop of stress and everything. And it was only afterwards, many years later, when I realized that it was actually my breathing pattern. So when I got stressed, because deadlines, big clients, you know, like asking, where's our work? And I was like madly working and controlling my team and everything. I was cleansing my stomach. Of course, that was me. I was fighting, you know, I was ready. That's my way of being stressed. And that prevented me from breathing properly, which meant I overused all these muscles, which meant I had perpetual neck problems. And now that I've understood how to breathe, how to recognize that I'm going into that pattern, I have no neck problems at all. I mean, you know, I'm a yoga teacher, so I do yoga a lot, which helps, but I did yoga a lot then too. So I think for public speakers, it's about learning what your triggers are, what makes you stressful, knowing it's going to happen, but then finding, you know, figuring out a way to keep calm, either through breathing or through, you know, many strategies that you put in place, like being an early speaker on the roster or all the other things that you can do, you know.
Yeah. And we are going to, because that's very interesting and relevant to our listeners today, we're going to get to this point in a few minutes. Before we do that, like what happens though if we get it wrong? So again, if you think about public speakers, or it doesn't have to be a conference speaker, it could be a business professional who gives presentations from time to time at work. If you don't breathe correctly, what happens? What's the impact of breathing in our communication?
Well, if you're not breathing correctly, because either you're breathing in this very shallow way here, your body says, oh, not enough oxygen, you better breathe faster. So it's like a vicious cycle. So you get caught in this, that thing like when you're almost pre-panic attack. So it has an effect on your body because the brain's like, oh, danger, danger, and then the whole system goes into operation, like the hormones, and, you're going to sweat, and because you're literally preparing to run away. The brain doesn't really know if I'm being anxious, imagining fear. Anxiety is the fear of anticipation, that the sort of anticipated fear hasn't happened yet. Like, what happens if I get on stage and the microphone doesn't work, or I can't open my bottle of water, or my pages are in the wrong order? I'm manufacturing that. The body doesn't know the difference between that and, you're going to hit me over the head and kill me. It doesn't understand the difference. So when we're manufacturing our own anxiety pre-speech, because we do, don't we? We sit there going, oh my God, what happens if the audience, and, then the body goes into panic mode, and then the breathing changes. So the only thing that you can use, the best tool to put you back into calmness is breathing. Because, breathing is voluntary and involuntary. When we're asleep at night, we're not controlling it, are we? Our body's just running it all the time. But if I said to you now, right, Andrea, we're going to do 1 minute of calm breathing, you're actually going to take over controlling your breathing. So that's voluntary breathing, and that's the body leading the brain. So that's what you need to do when you get into these situations where you're manufacturing anxiety, is you need to be, right, I can use my body, my breathing to tell my brain that actually I'm fine and it's going to be fine, So I think it's a lot to do with, how you have to practice things. How if you were learning tennis, I remember as a kid, learning tennis, learning how to serve. It's really hard, isn't it? It's like you've got to get the ball up right and rack it back. I don't play tennis anymore, but there's a whole sort of loads of things you have to do. But then one day it all just goes like automatically. Oh my God, I did it. I think that's the same with practicing calm breathing.
On that point, Bridget,
you've got to be able to drop into it like that. Like I can just now drop myself into a way of breathing that my body tells my brain everything's fine. And I can do it because I've practiced it and practiced it and practiced it. So you can't just leave it till the day of your speech and say, oh, I'll do a bit of deep breathing. No, you're going to be doing it every day, several times a day, so that the moment when you want to take yourself to that place of calm and reassure yourself, you can do it with this physical breathing, this actual tool,
Yeah,
what I mean by that.
Sure. And on that point, Bridget, like based on your experience, how long does it take? How much practice? Say that, for example, somebody wants to get better at breathing effectively because now that person understands the impact of proper breathing when it comes to communication. How much practice are we talking? If somebody wants to get better at this, are we talking about years of practice?
No, I don't think so. Honestly, I think a few weeks.
Right.
I mean, even if you just did it. I tell you what I used to do when I lived in London. I used to, whenever I got on a bus or a train or the tube, I would do it. So I just get on, either be standing up or sitting down. I call it waistband breathing because for me, it's about relaxing my belly. It's relaxing my stomach, getting out of this fight mode. So I'd just be like, do a minute of waistband breathing. So I just get on the train, just wipe everyone out, even shut my eyes, just feel my waistband going in and out, and just like, How does that work? So that particular exercise that you used to do in a bus in London? Well, it works because you just ignore everything around you. You're safe, you've got your bag or whatever, and then you just focus on your breathing. And so for me, it's very much relaxing the belly. For other people, it might be relaxing this area, because if you've got a lot of tension here, perhaps you need to do a couple of exhales, because often we're hyperinflated. If you're a chest breather, you've got too much air here. So in order to get rid of it, you've got to blow it out, haven't you? So you've got to go, just shrug it out. So allow all that air out. So then you can use the whole capacity of the lungs. So
right.
Probably for top breathers, it's getting rid of air. And for people like me, the other kind, it's about relaxing this belly. And in both scenarios, then you can really use your diaphragm. Amazingly, many people don't know where their diaphragm is, and they don't realize they're not using it.
And it's good to know that there are some simple things that we can do, even in a bus,
Absolutely. Well, that's why I think that, you asked me how long. I mean, just put it into your day at different times. I mean, obviously I get up and do yoga every day, but I do some breathing at the beginning and some breathing at the end. So I know weekdays I've always done it, but I still do it. Sit down to have a coffee, do it then. Have a little coffee breath. You can do it in the car. You can do ones where you blow out, inhale through your nose, blow out through your mouth just while you're driving, and it's not going to take your focus.
Distract you. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I guess because you mentioned yoga, please correct me if I'm wrong, Bridget, but I assume that in your work with your clients, then there are some skeptics, and not because of yoga, but as soon as you start talking about yoga and then breathing and then maybe meditation, these kind of things, tell me if I'm wrong, but I can only assume that there are some skeptics. And I think that some people perceive this topic as a bit of like hippie or hoo-hoo kind of subject. Definitely. So how do you convert your skeptics? How do you make them understand that this is so important for their life and for their communication in general?
Well, number one, never fight a skeptic, I think, so don't try and do it with words, and don't tell them they're wrong. But I mean, when I was in London, I ran quite a few workshops in corporate situations where, there'd be like 20 people in a conference room, or I did it with teachers or whatever. And of course they're skeptical, and some of them come in and go, oh, I know how to breathe. And that's fine. It's like, great, that's really cool. But then, explain some of the stuff. But the main thing is once I've been through a little bit of this is how breathing works and everything, I get them to breathe, and they watch each other. I pair them up. And so then I get people to, like, we would be paired up, and I would watch you, and I'd be like, does he breathe through his nose or his mouth? Is his chest moving? Is his belly moving? And I would count how many breaths a minute you do. And then we'd switch. And just by doing that, you'd learn a lot. And then you go around the room and you realize some people are doing 8 breaths a minute. Some are doing 26. So, what's that about? Why are some people? So then then people start to understand, well, shallow breathers are going to take a lot more breaths, and then the calmer breathers. And so then by the end, there's a little bit of buy-in, and then I get them doing some belly breathing. And
I like that, Bridget, because what you're doing there is you are not just teaching. I'm assuming we are talking about maybe workshops or training courses, and it's not just you teaching and explaining and communicating.
They have to do it.
You make them feel it. You make them feel it. You make them live it and experience it, and that makes a big difference.
Well, the other thing I do is usually before I get breathing with them is I get them to do a lot of stretching. Because if you're a chest breather and you're being overusing these muscles here, they're going to be quite tight. And imagine, when we're young, we do a lot of sport, but as life goes on and we get kids, perhaps we have less time. So there's a lot of people that don't do any sport at all, do they? I mean, they might walk to the tube. And I remember being in a workshop. It was in an IT company, so there's a lot of men. And I said, just to warn you that we're going to do something like this. So if you can just see me, spreading out your arms and then going up, very simple things. And if you're a top breather, this is going to hurt you. So this guy, everyone did it. And at the end, this guy came up and he goes, oh my God, it was so painful for me just to do that. And I was like, oh, I see. And then it turned out he had a lot of breathing problems, and he had sleep apnea, where you almost stop breathing and then you start again. And basically, he's so tight across here from having this dysfunctional breathing pattern. So for him, it was a total physical revelation. And it allowed him to understand, well, maybe I need to. I said, you've got to go to physio. Like, this is beyond a workshop. Physios are great. If you find a physio that really loves the whole breathing stuff, they're brilliant. They're the people to see, I think,
Okay. And also, Bridget, can you give us some maybe practical tips or exercises, if you can describe them so you said before that there are things that people can do even like every day for a few minutes. So are there any breathing tips or exercises that people can implement before they give a presentation? And it could be, Bridget, maybe a few minutes before a presentation. It could be like as you said, as a daily practice, but before a presentation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was an interpreter. I was a conference interpreter. So we would be sitting in our booth all day, and then you have a whole string of people coming to give talks, and you can really see. I think that's probably where I started to get interested in public presentation, because you can see how stress affects all the different speakers. So obviously, if you're the fifth speaker of the morning, you can't actually be going, because 4 people have to go before you. So, but if you're not in that scenario, I think the first thing you have to do is release the stress from your body, release the stress from your muscles and all that you're holding in. And therefore, the best thing is just to do some very simple stretching. So that's the first thing I'd suggest, because otherwise the stress is still in there. All the tension is in there. So you've got to release the tension physically first. So, I keep doing that, but that's just the classic that you can do. But obviously any ones like that, and just, up and down like this and all that kind of thing, and like that and like that. So anything that allows you just to really expand your chest and open your chest as much as possible. And then a little bit of the head stuff, and even if you are the fifth speaker, I still recommend doing that before, and just freeing that. And then if you are, because you might be even sitting on stage, so that's pretty complicated, but let's imagine you're not sitting on stage, you're not on a panel, you might be sitting in the audience. So you have got the opportunity to do some sort of mind over matter, some breathing. So the first thing is to sit up straight and completely relax, because if you're slumped, you can't breathe properly, can you? So the first thing is to be sitting up straight, and then to relax the belly. That's the next thing, because a lot of people will be with the stress holding that. So then releasing the belly, and then just using the nose, because the mouth is emergency breathing, so it should be nose breathing.
The mouth is emergency breathing. Okay.
Yeah. The mouth is for emergencies, like like that whole or that's emergency breathing. But all other breathing should be through the nose. And we can talk about nose breathing in a minute if you want to. So sitting up straight, having maybe doing quite a couple of big exhales. You can inhale, in through your nose, and then if you can just do that without anyone noticing you, just like let it all out, and then relax your shoulders, so the physical part is all nice and relaxed. I mean, you want the optimum position for the diaphragm to function, and then just do belly breathing,
Yeah.
Because if you're sitting Bridget, in a room, I mean, you can't do the alternate nostril is the way, but you can't really sit there doing that, or people hold them. So I think you just got to do, but that's why the practice is so important. That's why if you're doing it every day at home, or when you get in the car, or when you get on the bus, or before you go to bed at night, or whatever it's going to be, then you can just do it so easily,
Becomes natural. Yeah,
exactly.
And you say, okay, maybe before a presentation, you can simply do some belly breathing, because I like to make it as simple as possible for listeners to actually do it.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? How many of these breathing, into the nose, out through the mouth? How many? Are we talking about 3, 5, 10, 100? Yeah. What would you recommend?
Good question. Well, I like to do ones where I count, because I have discovered through so much practice that if I'm not doing something with my mind initially, I'm still having my anxious thoughts. So, if you're there going, oh my God, my palms are sweating, and I think my papers are in a mess, and what if, then how can you relax? So in order to shut that off, you give your language center something else to do. So the classic is just counting, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, I mean, imagine you could inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's balanced. But really, to relax, you need to have a longer exhale than inhale. So maybe inhale 4, exhale 6. So I know you speak more than one language, and I'm an interpreter, and I speak, 4, let's say.
You speak many more languages than I do. For me, it's 2.
Some badly and some very well. But what I do is I do multilingual counting. So I go, for instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I go in and out like that. And I just count in different languages. And my brain is so busy concentrating on the language, can't have a single anxious thought. And then I'm doing my nice belly breathing. My exhales are longer. So that's sending signals to the brain. Everything's safe, Bridget. You're in a good place. And I just, and then that's it.
I love it. I love it. Do you have Italian in your language toolkit? No.
Spanish, English, French, and Chinese. So
right. Well, Spanish is similar. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Bridget,
you can do anything. You can do apple, pear, plum, banana. It doesn't matter what you do. Bread roll, baguette, brown loaf. Bloomer. Do whatever you like. Just give your language centers in your brain something to do.
Something to do, something to think about.
Anxious thoughts,
That's great. Sorry. That's a great tip. And Bridget, so far we've been talking about what to do before a presentation. Do you have any breathing tips for when, I wouldn't say things go wrong, but when, from an anxiety perspective or nerves, something is not perfect during a presentation? What can we do there from a breathing perspective?
Well, I think number one is pause, because apart from the fact that you're calming yourself down, actually it makes the audience look at you, doesn't it? I mean, you know that from being a great speaker, that as soon as there's silence, like everyone's like, what? So I think pause. So just say, just give yourself that moment, and really got to return to belly breathing, because if you are getting anxious or if you're feeling time constricted or whatever, I also think audiences are really, really kind, and they understand if you say, I just need a minute to gather my thoughts, or I may have got my slides, or because what I used to see a lot when we were at conferences is that the people at the beginning of the day would start being longer and longer. So the poor people before lunch were told, you've only got 10 minutes and not 20. I mean, imagine, you want to share your work, or you're an academic, and suddenly someone's chopped it in half. So, rather than going at 100 miles an hour, you're going to have to say, I've just been told I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm just going to pick the salient points. And if anyone wants to come and talk to me afterwards, that would be great. I think you have to treat the audience like another human being,
Yeah. So no, and Bridget, what you said
is have a drink of water.
Okay. Absolutely.
No one's going to be surprised if you say, I'm just going to have a drink of water, and it allows you to gather your thoughts, and it also allows the audience to kind of start processing your message, And you've got to return to the belly breathing. So the best thing you can do is exhale, because the chances are that if you're getting stressed, you're doing these little shallow breaths here, and you can't get a whole lung full of air and get all that lovely oxygen to feed your brain and everything, because you're just breathing in this little tiny space, So you need to exhale. So perhaps you go, oh, right, where was I? No one's going to be.
That can be very helpful.
Exactly. I mean, okay, here we go. Andrea, let's just inflate our chest and hold our breath, okay, together. So in other words, not the diaphragm, just here, okay? Through the mouth, okay, go. Let it out. Do you start to already feel a little bit like, oh,
yeah.
So now let's do it with our belly. So now this time I want you to breathe in, and your diaphragm should go down and your belly goes out. Okay, so it'll be a slower breath in. So let it out. What was the difference?
Yeah, no, it's much more relaxing.
Exactly.
And I was also thinking, as I was doing this, I was also thinking about our listeners who's going to listen to this episode without watching us, just on audio. So I don't know what they understand.
Sorry about that.
No, that's totally fine. It's mainly on video. It's just a thought, but yeah. Also, Bridget, I wanted to go back to your two or three tips, because they're so important. One, like drink water. Absolutely. Water is your friend. Why not? What's wrong with just having a glass of water? I would say avoid caffeine, coffee, and these kind of things before a presentation, but water, absolutely. Also, you said pauses. Now, this is so important. Of course, it allows you to breathe also more effectively. And in addition to that, from a communication perspective, pauses are so important. Exactly. Dale Carnegie used to say that silence is one of the most eloquent things in the world. And I love that, because every time you pause, as you said, first of all, you give your audience time to think about what you've just said.
Yeah.
Also, for you as a presenter, you give yourself time to think about what to say or what to do next. And then every time you pause, that increases the impact of what you've just said. Exactly. So I agree with you 100%, Bridget. We need to have the courage to slow down and to pause from time to time. Yeah.
Just one tip about water.
Sure.
And that is, be responsible for your own water, because even as interpreters, we used to get to the conference room and in the booth, you know, we're in these funny little boxes with the glass front and we got all our gear on. We wouldn't have water sometimes because, you know, they forget about the interpreters. It's all about the delegates. So when you're the speaker, don't rely on anyone else providing your water. In other words, usually when you get to a venue, there's water bottles, but not anymore, because nowadays it's all about recycling. So have your own water bottle. And if you have a brand new bottle, open it before. Because once I was like, I just couldn't open my bottle giving a talk to some MBA group. It was terrible. There was nearly a guy in the front row coming to open it for me. So
I want my water.
I know. So have your own water, or make sure, because there's nothing worse than when your tongue, you know, sticks to the roof of your mouth because you haven't got any more saliva because you're so stressed, you know. So
of course.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great tip. Thank you very much. And also, Bridget, I wanted to ask you, I know that recently you've done a series of workshops and an interview with my friend Jimmy Cannon, and who is a voice coach. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, just out of curiosity, from your perspective, what's the connection between breathing and voice? So how is breathing effectively connected to the way we can use our voice to communicate a message more effectively?
Well, the air is like the fuel, isn't it? So your diaphragm, which is this huge, it's like a big parachute like that's attached at the front and at the back, which divides the upper body from the lower body and pushes the lower organs out the way so that lungs can inflate. It's used for posture and speaking and breathing. Those are the three functions of that massive muscle that most people underuse. So in order to have power to your voice, you've got to be able to inhale, haven't you? You've got to put the fuel in your body so that you can get it out. So if you're just breathing up here, like if we took a breath and then we had to talk, it's actually really hard. Like I can't even control what I'm saying. Whereas if I take a deep breath down here, you know, then I've got a much lower voice and I can probably actually talk for quite a long time. I'm even now still on the same breath and I haven't finished, have I? And I could even go louder. So you see what the difference is, that if you're not breathing correctly, you have no power, you have no fuel. So I think that's how you have to think of it. I mean, yes, oxygen is going around the body and all the cells and all that, but just in air that needs to come through across. I mean, Jimmy is the one about the voice and I'm not a vocal. And I know that you've been in workshops that he's run, but I think it is the power behind your voice, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
If you've got very inefficient breathing and you're just taking these little sippy breaths and it's all very shallow, you have no power. You have no power to your voice, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And also, Bridget, you've just mentioned posture as well. And so from your perspective, what would you recommend? Like, for example, say now when it comes to online presenting, because we are recording this, what is it, the 12th of April, okay? And so still, most of the time, we can only present online at the moment. So there you have a choice. You either stand up and give your presentation while standing, or you remain seated. From a breathing perspective, any preferences? What would you recommend?
I mean, I would rather be standing, but if I'm doing like this interview with you, I'm totally sitting. But actually, I'm sitting on the edge of my chair, and always have your feet flat on the ground. I think not legs crossed, and because look, I've crossed my leg and one of my shoulders has gone down. You know, so if you think about it, our spine is designed to sit on top of our pelvic girdle, our hips. So you need to find that position. So if we rock forward, like boink, I'm going to fall into my laptop. And if I go back, then I'm starting to put strain on my stomach muscles. So you've got to find that optimum place, I think. And I think that actually you know, when you're young and you're at school and they're like, Bridget, sit up straight, you know, all that. And it's so tedious. But actually, once you have got good muscles all around you, you can just sit up straight. Like, that's the thing about people that do yoga, you know, yogis, they can sit in the lotus position for a long, long time with no pain at all. I remember when I went to do my teacher training, I did it in Thailand in 1 month. And before that, I did a 1 month retreat in a different school. And we were in a huge hall and we had our mats and we could sit down and there was different cushions, but basically I had to sit cross-legged for 2 hours in the evening for the theory. So we did 2 hours of yoga in the morning, had some time off, 2 hours of yoga in the afternoon, and then 2 hours of theory. So you're kind of a lot of physical stuff. And it was so funny because at the beginning, everybody was a wreck because like they'd flown from all over the world, from their office, whatever. Nobody could sit up straight at all. So, you know, everyone was slouching or lying or whatever. And you could literally see as the bodies got stronger through yoga. And as we did more and more yoga, people were sitting straighter and straighter until at the end, everyone was just sitting there with the lotus position, legs crossed. And imagine the difference on your breathing of that, you know, of actually being able to hold your body up correctly because your muscles are strong, you know, and developed, and you've understood about releasing the belly and everything. I think it makes a big difference. So
it's something that I still need to explore and practice more. I have tried some yoga in the past, Bridget, and I'm very bad at it. I still can't cross my legs for more than 5 seconds or something.
Well, when I actually did my teacher training, we had a guy there and he had to sit on like 4 blocks underneath his buttocks,
exactly,
with his legs crossed at the beginning. I mean, it was almost like sitting on a stool. And and it took a long time. Even by the end, he couldn't do it. But the thing is, men are designed to be very powerful in the upper body, you know. So you guys are really good at doing plank and push-ups, and we're rubbish at that. Women, we are rubbish at that. And you guys have very strong legs. So you have very tight quads often compared to us. So it's much harder for a man to touch his toes than it is for a woman, because we're all about flexibility in the hips, aren't we? Because we have to give birth to babies. So we're designed differently. So the thing is that when you first, as a man, go to a yoga class, you're not going to be anywhere near as good as the women. It's just a given. You just need to accept that. And I mean, they do have classes for men led by men, and that's one option, I think, because then you're all in it together. But
yeah, what I find.
I mean, I don't really think it matters whether you can touch your toes. I mean, we don't need to have long quadriceps, you know, that's in a way that's insignificant, but it's about getting mobility into the body, you know. Yeah. So I like to teach yoga for mobility. That's because I'm in my mid-50s, and I really enjoy teaching people in my age group. I mean, all age groups, and I'm a qualified yoga for kids teacher as well. But I love teaching the older generation because they have probably got into bad habits, not doing as much sport, maybe just walking, but they've got a lot of tightness, you know. So I really enjoy helping people release their stress, understanding how to breathe properly, and then just, you know, building on that and getting more flexible. And
and I find
at ease with your body. It's a joy, you know.
Yeah, and I find it fascinating to explore in this conversation the link between what you do and your area of expertise from a breathing perspective and the way we can communicate our messages more effectively. And going back to what you've just said, I think that I'm designed in a wrong way because I'm rubbish at everything from a physical perspective. But
listen, everything can be learned, and I everything is about practice. And sure, we're not that good at the first time. You know, if I was put into a new sport today, I'd be like, what the hell is this? You know, but I'm sure with practice, you know,
of course,
it is, everything in life is about practice. Everything is about learning to use our body in another way. I mean, it's like people that can't cook, and then suddenly they, like many people in lockdown, I think, have learned how to cook, and they're just amazed that they can. It's just practice. Of
course. And the same applies for our listeners today to public speaking and communication and presenting. Of course, if you've never given a presentation in front of a real audience, whether that's face-to-face or online, it could be seen as daunting or difficult. Maybe you find it hard to get it right, to achieve your objective. But then that's the first presentation. Then if you do a second one, and then the third one, and then you get to 100 and 1,000, definitely you will become much better.
And then you get to a point you're like, oh, I'm really enjoying this.
Exactly.
That's definitely what happened to me. But I mean, interpreting is really hair raising. But in fact, there's a part of me that kind of likes that challenge. But I mean, talking about, I think you have to keep the audience on your side. And I think many public speakers or many speakers don't consider that from the outset. And this is what appalled me when I was a conference interpreter, because people would just get up and give a speech and you'd be like, that is not interesting. And people would be so panicky that they were reading like this, you couldn't even see their face, and you could just see, you know, I mean, they didn't think about us. Okay, we get that. We're trained to cope with whatever was thrown our way. But I really was amazed and appalled. It didn't matter if it was businessmen or academics or city councillors, many people just didn't seem to care about the audience. I found that shocking.
And I'm glad that you mentioned this, because when we work with our clients, Bridget, we always tell them that if you think about it, when you give a presentation, it's their presentation, not yours. It's the audience's presentation.
Yes.
And you're right. We need to think of a presentation as a present. If I want to give you a present, Bridget, it's your present, not mine.
Yeah.
And so I need to make sure that I know you so that I can buy something that you like. Yeah. Presentation is very similar. When we give people a presentation, it's their presentation, not ours. So we need to make sure that we know our audience and their needs and the context, so that we can develop and present a message which is relevant, related to them. I agree with you 100%.
I think the whole, you know, people are, I get it. I mean, if you have, say you've developed something fabulous and you get to present it, you want to tell people everything, you know, it's like you have so much to say. And I think one of the big issues that people have is that they want to say too much. So I think you have to, I mean, less is more, you know, keep it simple, stupid. All those little tips are true, but I think you have to keep people hungry in a way. So perhaps don't tell them everything and invite them to come and speak to you afterwards. You know, there should be a queue waiting to speak to you afterwards.
Yeah.
And I found some of the best speakers to interpret for were the ones who just walked up and down the stage, you know, with the microphone and just were telling a story, and they were so engaging, and often we knew what they were going to say before they said it. Honestly, it's bizarre when you get a great speaker, because they speak in whole sentences, because there's a thread, because there's a beginning, a middle and an end, because there's a direction. Oftentimes you know what they're going to say. Obviously you don't say it because you can't, because you have to wait for them to say it in their language. But I didn't believe that at the beginning, that could happen, but it really can. So
it's true. You are so right. One of the mistakes I see all the time with so many presenters is that often we know so much about a subject. Yeah. Sometimes we are also emotionally attached to it, that we think, as you said, Bridget, that everything is important. And so we feel that we need to communicate everything, right? Yeah. But I always tell people, look, put yourself in your audience's shoes. If everything is important, then for them, nothing is important.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, the more, it's like, if you think about writing, all experience, actually, you are also
an editor. Yeah,
so you know this better than anybody else. All experienced writers know that the secret to great writing isn't in what they say, it's in what they don't say, right? The more they cut out, the better the article or the better the book. Yeah. The same is true when it comes to presentations. Now, Bridget, as we approach the end of our conversation today, maybe a couple of other curiosities that I have. Like, again, just out of curiosity, you don't have to have it, but by any chance, when you give your own presentations, do you have some sort of either ritual or any warm-up exercise that you do? It could be connected to breathing, it could be connected to anything else. Any ritual or warm-up exercises that you do right before a presentation?
I don't have a ritual. I do always know my stuff.
That's your ritual, which is good.
It's preparation, and because of being an interpreter and seeing people rush and realizing that people have never timed, I spend a lot of time on timing And in the process of cutting things and making them shorter, I end up becoming the master of my content. I think that's the way to put it. So in other words, if I'm invited, like last year, I was actually invited by the French Chamber of Commerce in London to give a 15-minute mini workshop on networking, because I had to do a lot of that in Beijing, obviously. And I ended up only speaking for 10 minutes and everybody loved it. But it's because I'd spent a lot of time the day before cutting it, literally talking to my mirror. And so on the day, I didn't need any notes because I'd spent quite a lot of time just getting the ideas really succinct. And it was so good. I think it's the best thing I've ever done. And it was 10 minutes. And I was like, wow, I've learned a lot. You know, I really got them engaged and I got them doing things. You know, that was the other minutes. I'm not boasting. It was so well done in that. Yeah, you've got to know. So number one, absolutely know your stuff. In other words, and I didn't have any support. You've got to know your presentation well enough so that if there's a technical hitch, you can still do it. That's the gold standard. I've seen also many times people coming with USB sticks and it not working. And then they're like all fumbling and going, oh, well, if I had my presentation, and like, well, you haven't. So, you know, be a professional. So know your stuff, be able to present it if you can't have your PowerPoint. I do actually, and the other thing I do, I don't know if this is really to do with breathing or anything, but is I always chat to people beforehand. I always arrive early. And so I always chat to people, and it's great because then you use those little tidbits in. So I'll be chatting to you and you'll say, oh, you know, this, that, and the other. And I'll go, I was talking to someone at the coffee, Andrea, I think it was, and he told me blah, blah, blah. And immediately the audience is like, oh, I like this person because, you know, and if you go to a company, then they love it because you're like, oh, your managing director told me this and your marketing. So I always chat to people and I always use what they say. I just put it back in somehow, somewhere.
That's great. You connect. You connect with the audience.
You hear what you're hoping for. And then I say, well, one of you said that today you're hoping that I will blah, blah, blah. So I always kind of knit those little connections. And
super useful.
I also think, like, say I've connected with you before and I you know, like we might have got on, and then I'll look out for you and you'll probably smile at me because that's a natural human thing to do. And I'll smile at you. And then that's nice because then you've sort of got people. Obviously, you don't want to just, oh, I'm just talking to Andrea, you know, like I'm not looking at you now. So that would be terrible. But I like to have a few people that I kind of can look at and who I've engaged with. So I always do that. So I always arrive a long time before, totally calm, you know, and time to get calm if I'm not calm. And I can't possibly be late because I've, you know, built all that time in. And then I do the stretching. If I feel, you know, I'll go to the toilet or wherever and I'll just stretch out. And then I always do the belly breathing, sitting in my chair. When I'm, you know, like if it's a speaker before or if they're starting to introduce me, then I just totally focus on my belly and just do those deep breaths through the nose, nice and quietly. And I'm just do some self-talk. If there's too much chatter, then I say, this is all going to be good. I mean, what can go wrong if you've got everything? If you've done your timing, you've got your good content. What can go wrong? Nothing really. Nothing can go wrong. I mean,
very useful, Bridget. Everything you said is super useful. Great tips. One in particular I really like, and I don't see often. You said that in that particular situation last year, I think it was with the French Chamber of Commerce or a few years ago, you were given 15 minutes. And you were ready to finish your mini workshop within 10 minutes. And that's great. For example, we always tell our clients to, especially when you've got a limited time frame, it could be 15 minutes, 20, or even 30 minutes, an hour, always plan to finish your presentation within 90% of the time that you have available. And that allows you to, as you say, to really know your stuff, to be prepared, to be flexible, because if something goes wrong, either with the technology, or maybe you forget something, or maybe you've got that extra question from the audience, then you've built in that buffer, then that makes a big difference. So,
I agree. I think audiences, it's a bit like a horse and you have to ride. I think they need to be led. And I think that's quite scary when you haven't got much experience speaking, because you don't understand that that's your responsibility. But once you understand that actually you get to I don't want to use the word manipulate, but you get to sort of control what's going on in the room. It's actually brilliant for everyone because you are in control of you and what's happening with the audience. But they've come for something, haven't they? I mean, they're sitting there waiting for something. And once you start taking control, like you might say to them, oh, I want to start with some breathing, or, you know, people start with all sorts of funny things. I always start with a funny story. I just think it's typical British. You've got to have an anecdote. It can be super short. But once I understood that I'm in charge of them, then to me that was a revelation. And I really learnt that by doing interviews. As I was saying at the beginning, I used to help at a literary festival in Beijing, a huge festival. And not only did I interpret for all the French-speaking authors, so, you know, simultaneous, so consecutive, they speak, I'd speak, you know, so I would do that with an audience sitting in front of me. But I also did a lot of interviews and moderation, and that's really where I think I understood about how to control the room. And I think audiences want to be led, so you have to get up. So, for instance, when I was doing that French Chamber of Commerce thing, it was at the end of it's like they would present themselves to their new members. And then, so it was a whole, every little department would get up. And then they said, oh, can you just do this 15 minutes at the end? So they did a presentation. And then the woman who was in charge, she said, oh, should we have a toilet break, a comfort break, she called it. And I was thinking, no, can't let my people out the room. Like, that would be a disaster. They won't come back. And so I like in a split second, I went, no, you have to take control. And I just jumped up and I went, no, really? This is only going to be 10 minutes. You're all going to stay, aren't you? And they couldn't say no. And they were like, yeah. And then I had the room. That's it. That's all I had to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And also
taking control is quite scary, but actually it's just like, you know, when your kids are at home and they're all being naughty, it's like, okay, everyone, you've got to be that person. You've got to take control of them. That's what they're expecting. And then they'll play with you. They'll laugh with you. They'll interact with you. I think a lot about that, because we all, like, if we see someone nervous or weak, we wouldn't, you know, we're not impressed, are we? I know that's a mean thing to say, but that's our worst nightmare, isn't it? It's to be weak. Nobody wants to be vulnerable. So audiences, I think they want to be kind to people, but you have to give them something to latch onto, you know, you have to feed them something or engage them in some way. So
no, definitely. And Bridget, as we conclude today, are there any, maybe one book, again, if you don't have it, that's fine. This is always a question that I like to ask at the end, because I love reading, and it's my opportunity to learn also something new in addition to everything else that we've just discussed. Mm-hmm. Is that, if you think about breathing in particular, and maybe, I don't know if you have in mind, breathing and communication connected, is there one book that you would really recommend to us?
I can't think of one that's breathing and public speaking, but I read an absolutely fabulous book written by an Irish guy that's called The Oxygen Advantage. And I loved that book, and I've reread it and I dip into it all the time. And it's very, very interesting. And I think that's a good one. If you think, oh, I don't know about my breathing, I need some help, he explains how to breathe, and he talks about asthmatic people and people with stress problems. And it's a really, really good book, and it's written in it's an easy read. I mean, it's got science in it, but it's an easy read. So it's called The Oxygen Advantage, and I can't think of the author. I'm sorry. No,
that's fine. We'll find. Yeah, fantastic.
He's an Irish guy. He was trained. There's a very famous way of breathing called Buteyko, and he trained with that school. Okay. And now he's, you know, like many people do, he's evolved his own system. And he gives a lot of practical exercises that you can do while you're walking, all sorts of different things you can do, and it's really fun. I still do them. So that would be my recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you. I look it up. The Oxygen Advantage. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And Bridget, before we close today, is there anything else? Is there a question that maybe you wish I'd ask you, but I didn't do it? Anything else? Any final messages that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, someone who taught me always used to say, if in doubt, breathe out.
I love it.
And I think that's a really, good thing. You know how we had that whole trending thing, don't panic, breathe, or don't panic, have a gin and tonic, all that. and it had don't panic, breathe. I think it should say don't panic, breathe out, because we are mainly hyperinflated. So we've got too much air in our lungs and we don't let it out. So as we don't let the air out, we can't bring in new air. So it's almost like if you had a bottle of water and it's getting fuller and fuller and you can only put a little bit in. Because did you know that the lower lungs down, I know the people listening, but at the bottom of your lungs, if you don't breathe deeply and if you don't exhale fully, you literally get stale air in your lungs. I mean, to me, that is just the most disgusting thought. It's like going into your granny's house, and she hasn't opened the windows for months and there's a nasty smell. That's what happens. So breathing out and exhaling is really important. And so, taking a huge breath in through your nose and then blowing it all out through your mouth and literally cleaning it out. Because that's what yoga is about. It's a lot about the movement with the breath, and it helps you expel the air, So I think, if in doubt, breathe out. That's someone else's saying, but I think it's a really
We'll finish with that. I love it. If in doubt, breathe out. Yeah. And I also loved all your analogies and anecdotes today. Bridget, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated it, and I've learned a lot. It's been so interesting, and I would say let's keep in touch, and all the very best.
Thank you, Andrea. It was a real pleasure talking to you. I enjoyed it so much, and it's nice to be talking to your listeners, even though I don't know them. I hope it was helpful.
Definitely. Thank you, Bridget. Cheers.
Okay. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.